My wife said, "You make me sick just by breathing." The next morning, she packed her bags while I was making her coffee. I am a 32-year-old man, and the night my wife told me that my breathing made her sick, I felt my chest forget what air was for. She said it at the end of a long day, in a flat voice that did not shake. It landed like a lid on a pot. I stood very still so nothing else would spill. I washed the dishes in silence and tried to keep the house from hearing my heart. In the morning, I woke early out of habit. I ground beans and heated water because I believed small kindness still mattered even when big love felt broken. While I waited for the kettle, I heard wheels on hardwood. A suitcase rolled across the hallway. She walked into the kitchen with a calm that looked like sleep and told me she would be staying with a friend for a while. She said I should not make this about me. She took the mug I had prepared, did not drink it, and left. I stood with my hands warm from the cup she did not want and felt something cold take the place of pride. We had been married 4 years. We met in a library where I was finishing a cover letter and she was searching for travel guides. She said later that she liked my focus. I liked the way she turned simple plans into days that felt like they belonged to someone careful. We built a modest life. 1 bedroom. 1 car we shared without keeping score. We ate at home and saved a little. We used calendars and wrote lists and wrote each other notes that said practical things. It was not dramatic. It was steady. I believed steadiness would protect us from storms. I did not understand that contempt is a storm that grows indoors. The first signs were small and easy to excuse. She stopped asking about my day and began measuring me in units I did not know how to meet. She said my pace annoyed her. She said my habits made the house feel small. She began to narrate my errors to friends as jokes. People laughed because she timed them well. I laughed too, at first, because I wanted to be fair. Then I noticed how my body tensed before every gathering, waiting to see which ordinary flaw would be turned into content. We argued in safe patterns. She said I thought too small. I said we should not build our life on other people's eyes. She said I did not understand ambition. I said ambition without kindness becomes hunger. We went to sleep on opposite edges and woke up earlier to avoid each other's breathing. When work sent her to a conference for 3 days, I missed her like a man who still believes in the bones of something. When she returned, she moved through rooms like a visitor. Money joined the tension in the ways money always does. The rent went up. Groceries ate more of the month. My hours were steady, her contract rotated. She began to call our savings a prison. I called it a bridge. She wanted to take a trip with friends and said she would pay it back later. I said later needs a date. She changed the subject to how boring I had become. I stood there and tried to look like a person who does not shatter when called simple. The comment about my breathing landed after a string of days where every sentence bumped into the edge of something sharp. I had suggested we cook at home to avoid another card charge. She said I could not even enjoy a meal without turning it into math. I said math keeps meals available. She said she was tired of being supervised by a spreadsheet. I said I was tired of asking for respect. She stared at me as if I had become a noise in the apartment instead of a person. Then she said it. She said my breathing made her sick. She said the sound of me made walls close in. There was no shout. There was only a final tone people use when they confirm a checkout time. After she left with her suitcase, the house felt like a hotel I had overstayed. I walked room to room and collected the tasks I could still do. I took out the trash. I wiped the counter. I opened the window and listened to other lives. I texted her that I hoped she was safe. She responded hours later with a short line that said she needed space to think and that I should not contact her unless it was about practical matters. My throat hurt when I tried to swallow. That afternoon I sat at the table with our laptop and started making a list. I opened the bank app and checked our balances. The joint account showed 2 withdrawals from the previous evening, both cash, both from a location near the station. The amounts were neat, round numbers that felt like decisions made in advance. I checked our emergency fund. A transfer had moved a portion to her personal account. The memo field said, temporary. My chest turned to stone and then to dust and then back to stone. I printed statements because paper helps when feelings do not. I cleaned and waited. I let the apartment be quiet so my head could organize the next day. At night I lay awake and listened to the refrigerator hum and the neighbors laugh and the front door of someone else's hallway open and close. I wondered how many people had heard a sentence like the one I had heard and had kept breathing anyway because air, unlike love, does not ask for permission. 2 days passed. She sent a message saying she would return to pick up more clothes and a few documents. She asked me to be out when she came. I said I would honor that. I left a small bag of things she might forget in the hall and went to a cafe with a notebook I did not open. When I returned, drawers had new spaces in them. A shelf had a different balance. The photo on the fridge was gone. A ring mark on the wood where her mug used to sit looked like the outline of a habit. On the table, she had left an envelope. Inside, a short note said she needed time to consider who she was in this marriage and whether she had room to breathe. The word breathe glowed like a warning light. I folded the note and felt something in me steady, not because it was kind, but because it was clear. I started documenting because people forget their own promises when rooms get loud. I wrote down agreement dates. I listed our recurring bills and who paid which. I wrote what she had said about repayment when she used our savings for new work clothes last season. I attached receipts. I do this for a living in a small way, managing budgets for a logistics firm, translating movements into numbers that can carry weight. I never thought I would use those muscles at my own table this way. On the third day, I opened the shared tablet to check the grocery list and saw an email notification slide across the screen. It mentioned a relocation package and a start date. I did not click it at first because respect matters, even when you are bleeding. The second notification mentioned a leasehold in another city a few hours away. The dates matched her conference trip from last month. My mouth went dry. I tapped once. The thread unfolded like a map I had not wanted to see. There were messages with a recruiter from a startup that had moved fast and a contract attached with a salary that outpaced mine by a wide stripe. There were requests for discretion. There were notes about a furnished sublet near the office. There was a line where she described herself as single to a landlord because it made the process simpler. My eyes stayed on that line until the screen dimmed. I sat still for a long time. The insult about my breathing turned into a tool in the light of those emails. It had been used to make leaving feel necessary instead of chosen. She had packed the night before while telling me I took up too much air. She had withdrawn our savings and called it temporary while securing a new home. She had asked me not to make it about me in a note that had already written me out. I was not a villain and not a hero. I was a man who had believed a different timeline. I did not rage. I made tea and carried it to the window and let the steam mark the glass. I thought about the obligation to protect what we had built, even if that build was now ending. I wrote her a message that was careful and short. I told her I had seen the relocation emails on the shared device by accident while checking groceries. I said I understood that she had been planning a move. I asked her to meet for a practical conversation about rent, accounts, and the end of the lease. I kept my tone plain because people hear plain best when stakes are high. She replied 10 minutes later with a line saying she was not ready for a meeting but would consider a call. She added that she had meant what she said about space. I replied with a list of simple decisions that could not wait. I suggested we freeze the emergency fund to avoid misunderstandings. I suggested that we pick a move-out date so the landlord would have time to list the place. I offered 3 time slots for a call and attached a short document with bullet points. She did not respond that night. I slept with my phone face down to see if I could still choose rest. By morning, messages had arrived from a friend who had heard from another friend. Words moved through our small world faster than truth. I repeated the same sentence to anyone who asked. We were taking space and arranging practical things. The sentence felt like a railing. I held it. I went to work and did my job so well that my boss asked whether I wanted to take on a new client file. I said yes because forward is a direction even when the map changes. When her call finally came, it did not contain apology or anger. It contained a tone I recognized from people who have decided to turn a page and would like the chapter to rearrange itself to flatter them. She said she had felt suffocated. She said she had outgrown our life. She said the job offer made sense for her future. She said distance would help us both learn who we were without each other's expectations. She said she would send her share of the rent for 2 months. She said she would return the rest of the savings when she was settled. I wrote every sentence down so later versions could not edit them. After the call, I opened a new document and titled it with the date. I made columns for amounts, due dates, and the source. I added a thin column called health that I filled with short words like walk, pray, and call. I put the list on the fridge where a photo had been. It did not cheer the room. It steadied me. That week, I packed what I could not bear to see. The shirt she loved on me. The mug she always chose. The blanket that smelled like winter. I put them in a box and labeled it later. I cleaned the stovetop because grease becomes grief if you let it sit. I called the landlord and asked about notice periods. I cancelled a streaming service we shared without discussing it because saving €10 felt like telling the truth to myself in a small way. A mutual friend texted that my wife had posted a photo with a caption about fresh starts. I did not open the app. I folded laundry and placed it on the bed like a scaffold. My body needed structure while my head tried to understand. In the bathroom mirror I looked like a man who had aged 3 years in 3 days. I told that man out loud that he would be okay, then smiled at how strange it sounded to say it. At the end of the week, I printed a 1-page plan that divided the next month into boxes. Move-out dates. Utility transfers. A meeting with the landlord. 2 interviews I had finally scheduled because fear had made me avoid growth for a year. I sent the plan to her with a short note saying this was not a trap, just a route. She replied with a single line agreeing to the dates and promising a transfer by Monday. Monday came. A transfer arrived, less than promised but enough to calm the worst noise. The memo said, "For rent." I stared at those 2 words until they blurred. Then I put on shoes and walked to the river and stood until the wind cleared my face. I was not healed. I was not collapsed. I was exactly what a person is when the life they lived yesterday is no longer here and the life they will live tomorrow has not arrived. Breathing hurt and helped at the same time. I went home and opened the box labeled later. I took out one sweater and folded it again and put it back. I closed the lid and wrote a new label under the old one, Part 2. I did not know what that would be yet. I only knew I would not be the man who begged the storm to pretend to be weather. I would be the man who put tarps over what could be saved and let the rest be honest. The next month moved like a slow train. Every day brought the same landscape with one new tree. I woke early, prayed briefly, ate simple food, and crossed lines off the plan on the fridge. I called the energy company and learned the hold music by heart. I met the landlord and confirmed a walk-through date. I packed 1 box a day because moving is easier when you refuse to turn it into a marathon. I kept my ring in a drawer. I kept my breathing even. She sent 1 more transfer and a short message saying she would come by to collect the last of her things on Saturday. She asked again that I not be there. I agreed and left keys with the neighbor for the hour. When I returned, the apartment had a new echo. The bookshelf looked like missing teeth. A small plant had vanished from the sill. On the table she had left another envelope. Inside, there was a check for an amount that did not match our notes and a line that said she would return the remainder when her relocation stipend cleared. The memo field said, "Temporary." The word had traveled from the bank app to a piece of paper that would bounce pain into the future if I let it. I made a copy and filed it. I wrote her a firm, kind message that repeated the numbers as we had agreed and attached the document with our bullets. I set a new, fair deadline and added that after that date I would consider the debt formal and would handle it without further discussion. I removed apology from my sentences. I removed heat too. I kept only what the situation needed. She replied with a single word saying noted. At work, my boss complimented my focus and handed me a client with messy books. The file had the same structure as my life, too many assumptions, not enough dates. I built a timeline and wrote little truths in cells until the shape of the whole became manageable. I left at sunset and walked home on streets that now belonged to one person. The air smelled like rain. I felt the first quiet pride since the kitchen mug. I was still doing the job of a person. That mattered more than I had realized. One evening, I opened the shared tablet again to remove my accounts and saw a final thread of messages she had not deleted. It was a dialogue with the recruiter about start dates and housing. There was a professional tone and a personal subtext that had nothing to do with betrayals and everything to do with moving toward a life she had chosen. There was also a scanned form where she had declared no dependents, no shared assets, no complications. Reading it, I felt anger try to claw at the door. I let it scratch and did not open. Anger would turn me into a narrator of her story. I needed to stay the writer of mine. I logged out of everything and set the tablet near the door for her to pick up with the last keys. The final walk-through arrived. The landlord inspected corners with a penlight and said I had kept the place well. He asked if everything was all right. I said change is work. He nodded like a man who has painted many empty rooms and handed me a form that would release the deposit in 2 weeks if nothing came up. I signed and felt the strange relief that comes when you realize you have finished a chapter without skipping the hard pages. Her last transfer arrived the day before the deadline, down to the minute. The memo said, settled. I replied with the acknowledgement I had drafted, one sentence saying that the account was paid in full, that there would be no further claims, and that I wished her well. I signed it with my full name because this document was for my future self as much as for hers. I printed a copy and put it in a folder labeled, closed. My hands shook a little, not from doubt, but from the weight of the word. Friends asked whether I wanted to talk. Some wanted a villain to point at. Some wanted a joke to swallow the awkwardness. I picked 2 people who know the difference between listening and waiting to speak. We ate at my small table. I told them the story in simple order. I skipped the applause line. They nodded and washed dishes with me and left without advice. The house felt larger after those kinds of visits. I moved into a smaller place across town. It had good light and a quiet neighbor who watered plants on schedule. I bought a second-hand desk and a chair that did not hurt my back. I set up a routine that would not win any awards and would win the day. Wake. Pray. Move. Work. Cook. Call. Read. Sleep. Repeat. My body began to trust me again. My head stopped playing the sentence about breathing on a loop. It still visited sometimes in the night. When it did, I sat up and counted 10 slow inhales and 10 slower exhales and told myself that breathing was not a crime. It was proof that I was still here. Weeks turned into normal. Normal is underrated. It is a bed that does not argue and a shelf that remembers where you put your keys. It is a paycheck that arrives on time and a grocery list that fits in one bag. I passed my certification exam for a higher tier of responsibility and laughed alone in my kitchen like someone hearing a clean joke. I treated myself to a better skillet and used it to cook eggs that did not stick. Progress is sometimes a non-stick surface and a good night's sleep. My wife, now my ex in practice if not yet by paperwork, sent one more message months later. She wrote that the new job was demanding and that she was learning who she was without the version she had performed for years. She said she had been unkind. She said she hoped I had found peace. She did not ask for anything. I read it once and put my phone face down. I said a quiet prayer for both of us and returned to my day. I had invoices to reconcile and a pot of rice to watch. Life insists on continuing even when you think you cannot. My mother asked whether I would ever forgive. I told her forgiveness is not a door you swing open in one motion, it is a series of locks you release as your hands remember how. I said I was working on not letting contempt take root, because contempt ruins the soil and nothing grows well there. She nodded and told me to eat more fruit. Mothers translate philosophy into vitamins. I started running on weekend mornings, slow and careful. The city at that hour belonged to people who wave without knowing your story. I liked that. No one asked me to explain the gap on my ring finger. No one asked whether I had tried couples counseling. No one asked me to provide a plot twist. The air did not judge my pace. It just filled my lungs when I asked it to. I did the paperwork later, when I could read forms without shaking. I chose a process that kept voices low and timelines clear. I kept my language factual and thanked the clerk who explained a box I had almost ticked wrong. I left the building into ordinary sunlight and did not cry. I walked to a cheap cafe and ordered tea and watched people live, which is to say, I watched them choose bread and carry bags and check their phones and wait at lights. I felt part of them again. Once, months after the move, I saw her across a street. She was laughing with someone I did not know. For a second, my body braced for a scene that would ask for too much heart. Then the light changed. She crossed. I crossed. We did not speak. I felt nothing sharp, only the simple awareness that she had found a life she could breathe in, and I had done the same. Two truths can stand in the same air without fighting. At home, I pulled down the box labeled "Later." I opened it and took out the sweater and the mug. I held them and then put them in a donation bag. Later had arrived and did not need these props. I kept a single note from our early days, one where she thanked me for fixing a wobbling table and for caring about boring details. I kept it as a reminder that my steadiness is not a flaw to be mocked, it is a gift I bring to any room I enter. If someone asks me now what happened, I keep it short. I say contempt moved in quietly, and I moved out deliberately. I say she had a plan she did not share, and I found a plan that did not depend on her sharing it. I say my breathing was never the problem. My lack of boundaries was. When I set them, the noise faded. When I respected them, the air returned. I am not angry at breath anymore. I am grateful for it. It is the soundtrack of the small, decent life I am building again. I pay rent on time. I show up for work prepared. I text my parents on Sundays. I buy fruit like my mother said. I pray in the morning and the night without asking for magic, only for clarity and patience. Some evenings, I sit by the window and listen to the city and think about the man who stood with a coffee mug in his hand while a suitcase rolled away. I do not pity him. I thank him for not chasing. I thank him for putting the mug down gently and picking up a pen. This is not a revenge story. It is an inventory. I counted what was mine to keep, my work, my health, my name, my kindness, my breath. I marked what was hers to carry, her choices, her distances, her needs that did not match mine. I closed the books. I opened a new one. The first line is simple and true: I am still here, breathing on purpose, and no one is sick from it.
Follow me for more stories.